Hello, I'm Tom.
And I'm Hanne. Welcome to the Digital Behaviour Podcast, a podcast about human behaviour in the digital world.
In this podcast, we help you to understand what drives online behaviour, how we can measure this, and the impact on the wider world.
And today we're going to be meeting a social media expert, Luan Wise, to discuss social media behaviour. First, though, a quick glance at some research that caught our attention in the last few weeks.
So you may be aware that I've actually done some research in the past looking at personality traits and how that affects social media behaviour. And that was a big area of focus not quite 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago in the marketing industry. Particularly, you might recall that Cambridge Analytica were making a big song and dance about how they could basically match adverts to different personality traits. And a piece of research, therefore, that caught my attention recently was actually looking at how adverts can be micro-targeted based on personality traits. Now, this actually wasn't based on the 5-factor personality traits that a lot of academics swear by. This was actually a piece of research looking at MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is frowned upon, I have to say, in the science industry. But it was published in a reasonably high-profile journal, Computers and Human Behavior, and it basically showed that you can target adverts, political adverts in particular, according to their Myers-Briggs personality traits, which was interesting. And it basically shows that this area of research hasn't completely died. Generally, the correlations are quite low. It's not 100% correlation that, if I target, an extrovert with a certain advert type, that it's going to, exactly appeal to them. But there is some correlation. It's not totally irrelevant.
Yes, absolutely interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about the personality types? Might be nice for our sort of listeners to just have a bit of a better idea of what this paper looked at.
Well, yes, I'll start actually by talking about the wider personality traits. There are 5 personality traits. They basically spell the word ocean, so openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. They're the kind of widely accepted scientific basis for understanding personality. And personality, it is basically looking at words that we use to describe people. So rather than demographics, gender and age, these are ways of describing the way people are. And Myers-Briggs is actually a less robust way of doing a similar thing, whereas the ocean personality, the big 5, as they call them, tend to be more stable. And you're if you're an extrovert today, you'll still be an extrovert tomorrow. This particular paper, notwithstanding the fact that it's using Myers-Briggs, which is not ideal, still found that there was some correlation, particularly between those people who have a so-called thinking personality, they focus more on cognitive, and those people that have a feeling personality focus more on emotions, and then being able to target those particular traits, the particular types of personality with either a rational or an emotional political advert, and they showed there was a correlation. The big problem for marketers, I have to say, the practical problem is knowing what someone's personality is. I can guess what Hannah's personality is, for example, but I don't know without giving you a test exactly what it's going to be.
It's just really interesting to see how sort of personality traits still seem to be very interesting for researchers to try to determine how we can look at social media users from a more personal point of view. So really trying to understand them as human beings rather than just a target audience, or a target audience or segmented part of the population. So a recent paper that caught my attention was looking at influencers and how they're actually more successful in terms of engaging with their audience if they reference their close social ties. So in other words, if they really treat their life not just as a social media presence, but actually refer back to their friends and family, partners as well. And that seems to make them more sort of likable.
Yes, yeah, and I saw that paper actually. That was in Journal of Consumer Research, I think.
Yeah.
Chung, Ding, and Calorer. I've got it in front of me now.
Yeah.
So yes, the interesting thing about that, I often talk to students about influencers or spokespeople appearing human and the importance of not necessarily being absolutely squeaky clean and perfect, but actually, appearing human and, in this case, revealing your close ties. There's a sort of related theory called the pratfall effect, which is that when we make small mistakes, we actually appear more human and more likable. So, for example, if I walk into a lecture theatre and I trip over my laces, I might look a bit silly for 30 seconds, but the students will probably like me more because they see that I'm actually human. I'm not pretending to be absolutely perfect in everything that I say and do. So yeah, this seems to relate to that kind of idea, showing your ties. I think particularly that paper also mentioned about actually using first pronouns. So first person pronouns rather. So actually you're using we and us, and showing your connection to family members and close family friends and things like that.
Yeah.
Again, it helps to underline the fact that you are human and you have a life outside of whatever profession it is you work in.
No, absolutely. And making them seem more authentic, I guess, as well, not just in their professional role, but actually that there is more to life than just your professional role. So yeah, I thought that was
absolutely. Yeah. Another influencer paper that I picked up on also in JCR, Journal of Consumer Research. This is actually from an Italian researcher. I think it was a PhD researcher, Giovanni Cassio Rizzo. He found that actually the language that influencers use makes a difference. So in your case, it was more about the words and referring to close companions. This particular paper, also with Jonah Berger, who you may have heard of, very, very influential psychologist at the moment, quite young as well, professor in America. So this particular paper that Giovanni researched looked at when we use words like crumble and juicy. So these are words that apparently sort of resemble their meaning. They actually also lead to more engagement and also potentially a willingness to buy a product that's being sponsored by that particular influencer, whoever it might be. So
that's really interesting.
There does seem to be a lot of research around influencers at the moment, which is, for obvious reasons, the rise of new platforms like TikTok that Luan, our guest, often talks about in her updates. This is leading to more and more people trying to become influencers, and I suppose, therefore, a desire for research in this area as well.
No, absolutely. And a better understanding, of what works, because there were quite a few, as you said, there are new influencers coming every day, which means there's quite a bit of competition between influencers as well, and trying to understand from a business point of view, which one of those, seem to just create better engagement, understanding why. I do think it's really relevant, going forward.
Yeah. You sent me a paper as well about lifestyle marketing and brand influencer advertising, and how that relates to Gen Z as well. What did that paper tell you?
Well, they were mainly sort of hinting towards the fact that there is very sort of differences in generational use, when it comes to social media. And they initially said that actually they want to understand how Generation Z, so those younger audience between 18 and 24 years old, which make up quite a big part of the users on Instagram. I think it's about a quarter, so about 25%, that look into how their, again, personality trait and gender might impact how they're using social media.
Okay.
How they're using Instagram. And they did find there was no gender differences. So, male, female was the same. But they did find a correlation between personality and gender. And personality was even more important. Personality was more important than gender. Saying that, again, extroverts are more likely to engage with those influencers when it comes to advertising.
Okay.
So it's just another point made, I thought, which was quite good to try to understand, the user more from a human point of view and a personality point of view, rather than looking at them as a segmented target audience.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing those. I hope the listeners find that useful. A quick overview of a few papers that stood out to us in recent weeks. We should move on now, and I'm going to take a quick pause, and then we're going to be introducing our guest, Luan Wise. So, Luan, welcome to the podcast. We're delighted to have you with us. Obviously, you and I know each other. You've talked with me. You've contributed to all sorts of things that I've worked on in the past, and I think I've joined you on a live session actually on LinkedIn. But I'm aware that some of the listeners might not have met you. So, do you mind just introducing yourself and telling us what you do?
So I'm a marketer. I have been in this industry for over 20 years. Started my career working off agency side as a client account manager, then moved client side for 5 or 6 years, in-house as a marketer for a startup high growth business. I set up my own consultancy business 12 years ago now, and have a wonderful mix of working with clients and also teaching and training from a practitioner point of view.
Great. Was that a brave decision to go out on your own? Did it take a lot of thought and convincing before you took that step?
It kind of just happened. And for someone that is a planner, I'm very much a planner, it kind of happened in a conversation with my former employers as to, it was the beginning of a year, where am I going? What are my goals? What am I looking to achieve? What's happening within the business? And it happened quite organically in that my former employer suggested that perhaps because of the situation, I went and supported the shareholders' other businesses for 2 days a week and carried on my current role, which I've been doing for 6 or 7 years, for 3 days a week, see how that worked for everyone. And then kind of 6 months later, we had a review meeting. And I said, yeah, this is great. I'm loving this, new opportunities, keep doing and helping you grow. But I'm now kind of doing 2 roles and I'm not quite sure, what the next step is. And so my former director said to me, if you want to set up your own consultancy business, Luan, we can arrange the contracts and be your first clients. So it was a wonderful way to set up my own business, but not.
Yeah. What a great opportunity. I bet you never thought then that you would be becoming an author at some point in your career. I know you've written more than one book, but we're going to focus on one in particular. So can you tell us about the book that you've just released?
Yeah. So no, that also, it wasn't a specific plan, but I think it had been on my bucket list of things to do before I was 40. So I did do my first book back in 2016. And the book that I've just released in October, end of October 2023, is called Planning for Success, A Practical Guide to Setting and Achieving Your Social Media Marketing Goals. And this set out to be an update of version 2 of the book I published in 2016 called Relax, It's Only Social Media, but it ended up turning into something completely different for a number of reasons. One is that the update version, I did focus groups with readers to see what they wanted from a social media marketing book. I also worked in collaboration with Warwick Business School on some research for the book. And the timings of that project it coincided with a global pandemic. The questionnaire was ready to go out in March 2020. We put out the first part of the survey, but obviously, the world did change what we were doing, how my own business was working, how people working in social media needed to change and pivot and all those other words that we were using at the time. So
yeah,
the second version kind of got put on hold for a little bit while I focused elsewhere, but it was still in my mind.
Yeah.
And then returned to Warwick Business School and said, actually, should we do a second version of the research? Because we had such a nice snapshot in 2020. If we ran the questionnaire and the qual interviews again in November 2022, we could actually see, was there any shifts, any changes? And then it meant that I could launch into getting the book done in 2023.
Yeah, yeah.
Just a big welcome for me as well.
Hi, Anna.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for being here. As we've discussed earlier, we've met quite a few years ago in past as well, but it is really nice to have you on our podcast. So thanks for being here. And it's really interesting to hear more about your book, and I really feel your pain in terms of rewriting, because as we all know, social media is a very fluid channel, a very sort of changeable marketing channel. But I know you've listened into some of our sort of earlier discussions about some recent research findings, and I'd like to ask you sort of a couple of questions around that, if that's okay. So some of the things we've looked at and highlighted was really the importance of treating the social media users as persons, as real people, stressing their sort of human side. And the paper we've looked at was sort of the high engagement rate with influencers who really stress sort of their personal social ties, and talk about we and us and I, and talk about their human side besides just being a social media influencer. Can you tell us a little bit about how important you think it is for sort of businesses or professional users of social media to show that sort of human side?
I think what we ultimately need to think about social media is the word social in there, and that this is real-time, two-way conversations. It is not just about broadcasting and posting and, tick, I've done my post this morning. It is about interacting with people. And ultimately, we are all human and we do business with people. And Tom, in the paper you talked about earlier, talked about being likable as well. There are lots of people that do what we all do, but it is about kind of getting people to know us, like us, and trust us to have those relationships. And perhaps well, we've already mentioned the pandemic word. I think that kind of really supported that, didn't it, on how we work with people and we saw into each other's homes and what we were sharing as well. And I think in some of my work, particularly when I'm kind of training business professionals on how to use social media, and particularly LinkedIn, where it is done under personal profiles, one of the challenges is, how much do I share? Is there a line? Do I need to share everything about me or not? And I think it also comes into the B2B, B2C conversations about rational decision-making and emotional decision-making as well. And we don't take off one hat for being, I'm in my job now, and now I take that off, and now I'm a member of a family and a friend and all of that kind of stuff. I think what is really important in this kind of human element is that we don't feel under pressure to be the person that we're not and who we think we should be. We all see the posts around, I need to get up at 5 a.m. every morning and then do this and then do that. I think this is about probably the concept of personal branding and how we want to be perceived, what do we want to be known for, but also to set our own boundaries around what we're happy to share, what perhaps we don't feel so comfortable sharing. Do we want to be vulnerable? Do we, perhaps that's not our personality.
I just want to say, and that's a perfect link, to the personality types we've talked about earlier, and that research seems to be quite interested in, because it's just useful to consider. Sort of an extrovert would be much more happy, I guess, to share, more about, shout about their lives or talk about their lives, whereas an introvert might not be, So that's it's a really interesting fact to look at. And what would you say to sort of a business then? Really try to find what is comfortable for you and do that?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily to do with being an extrovert or an introvert. Perhaps it's to do with people's own personal situations around their family lives, around, their backstories, around things that have happened to them, whether that's been in the workplace or health-related matters. I think what I often encourage people to do is to observe what happens on social media and almost like find your own zone. Look at what some people are posting and go, I could never do that. That's just not me. That wouldn't feel like me. That I'm not comfortable with doing that. Not saying that that's right or wrong, but then finding your place of going, I am happy to share this kind of stuff, and that does work for me, and perhaps it is less personal. But I also think on social media, you need to consider that potentially what you post on social media could be viewed by thousands, if not millions of people, potentially. That would be wonderful. But also to kind of keep your conversation, I would class my conversations as one that I have publicly and on social media posts versus what we might chat about if we were actually next to each other over a cup of coffee and, the three of us, and we weren't being recorded as well. And I think people need to understand that you don't need to do everything for everyone on social media. It is about what parts of you are happy to share with people.
Yeah, it makes lots of sense.
So that was an interesting point that you made, Luan, about finding your own zone, but also, of course, being aware that there are lots of people potentially watching you, listening to you, looking at what you're typing on social media. Do you have any fundamental sort of rules of thumb that you advise businesses on when they're starting out using social?
I think the important point there is to remember that we're using it for business, and that has to be the focus. I think there's something about working in marketing, using social media, that we all feel that we should always be doing more, or that we could be doing more. And we all know that we can get involved in scrolling as a distraction if we're procrastinating, if we're researching something, and kind of go down all those wormholes. So I think my rule of thumb is really, it is a tool. Social media is a channel of communication. It's a tool, and we need to be focused when we're using it if we want to get the best out of it.
Would you ever advise that a company doesn't use social media, that they use other tools instead?
Yeah, I do absolutely see social media as a tool. And I think if you don't see it as a tool, it can become too big of a thing and overwhelming. So there are other tools in the toolkit. There's nothing wrong with traditional techniques, out of home, direct mail, picking up the phone, personal selling, all of those in the marketing toolkit. Sometimes I have advised clients to pause before they dive into social media I think because of the stats and the data and how many people are on social media now, I think it's over 60% of the global population. I think it would be hard to say don't use it at all. In particular, I think as a personal presence, if I couldn't go online, search and find you, it may be more of a negative situation than what is online. But I think what's, again, really important to bear in mind is you only have so many resources. So if you are using social media, you've got to do one or two things really well and do it properly rather than trying to do too much. And going back to my point about sometimes when I've advised clients to kind of pause or pull back on things, it's when they don't have everything else ready.
You mentioned just then, actually, that you wouldn't advise any companies not to use social media, but are there maybe certain behaviours that some companies just shouldn't engage in because it's going to be too risky, or it could generate potential for feedback that you wouldn't like, for example?
Absolutely, there are risks, the same as there was before social media in your business around, PR risks that you may need to manage and control. I think it's important to have that conversation in your business or for yourselves as a personal brand. What could go wrong? How could people respond to something that I'm putting out there? The risks are, around reputation and, management and opinions, and going back to kind of that thought of what are your boundaries and what do you want to share publicly. That is part of your kind of risk assessment and planning as well. Of course, there are some industries that are heavily regulated in terms of what you can and can't do, particularly financial services, financial promotions, legal. There's some guidelines around charities and things like that as well. So I think when you're setting out your reasons to use social media as a tool, you need to understand what could potentially go wrong and either don't do it, don't post it, or be prepared for the responses that you might get.
Can I just, Luan, pitch in there, because I think what you said about sort of how to use social media wisely in terms of, planning and setting goals is probably one of the experiences I've made before. The businesses really don't know what their goals are. Why should we use social media? What is it good for? Mm-hmm. And what can I actually achieve with social media? Is it actually the sales, or is it more about, engaging with my audience? I realized you said earlier that it's not just about doing a post in the morning and, ticking a box and saying I'm done, but it is that interaction. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of goal setting? What is realistic for, or achieving with social media? What are goals that you have seen in the past as, this is something that businesses can actually achieve versus this is completely unrealistic?
Yeah, brilliant question. And we could do a whole podcast on this. I'm quite excited. I think the challenge is, it's diving in. It's all new shiny. It's a new feature. It's a new tactic. Oh, reels are the latest thing. Let's create a reel. Why am I doing it? What's the purpose? Who's the audience? And I think this is something that I really tried to focus on in my book was you've got to get the marketing fundamentals right to get results from social media. And it starts with goal setting, but also not just goal setting for social media, as I keep calling it a tool, but higher up, what is your business strategy? What are you trying to achieve overall as a business? Then what is your marketing strategy to help that business strategy? And make sure that you're aligning everything so that you're not setting goals just for social media and diving into a tactic, because as marketers, we would never have done that for print or for, other tactics of direct mail. We wouldn't go straight into it. We would align it with a purpose and cause to action and what we were trying to do. I think what's really amazing about social media is that it can fulfill so many goals. And again, if we use another marketing, model around the funnel, we can support awareness, activity, we can support consideration, and we can support conversion as well. So I think as planners, we need to strip it back and say, what are we trying to achieve overall? And then how can social media help us, rather than going, my goal for using TikTok is.
Yeah, and that is, again, that's sorry, Tom, but that's the feedback I get from sort of businesses I'm working with as well. When I say, have you thought about using some of the newer channels? And they say, yeah, but, what does it mean if I have 100 followers on TikTok? What does it mean if I've got sort of new friends on Facebook, or people who like my page. So what is the actual, I guess, translation of these metrics into business metrics, And
that's where we have to really work hard as marketers to almost market ourselves and get buy-in.
Obviously, people aren't logging into social media expecting to see marketing content. So what would you advise companies to do to actually make content which, yes, promotes their business or their product or their service, but also is engaging and actually interesting and something that the average person on the street would actually really want to engage with? Because we try to skim over adverts as quickly as possible.
I think you're absolutely right, Tom, in that, people don't go looking for marketing content. And in traditional channels, we now know how to skip it or turn the page. And this is the point that platforms like TikTok are trying to make is, don't make ads, make TikToks. And this is about understanding the environment of the tool and being involved in it and understanding, going back to the personalities and the user behaviors and the data is, why are people going to individual platforms? What is their role? And we know from data and observations that people go to TikTok for entertainment. They go to LinkedIn for supporting their career growth and business contacts. So we need to align the content, whether it's paid or organic, with the nuance of the platform and people's purpose and behaviors of that platform. Then we could dive into going, someone will post on LinkedIn going, this should be on Facebook. But that's again down to individual behaviors and uses, and I don't think you should ever apologise for your own reasons, but you should have your own reasons for, I'm putting this on LinkedIn today because, or I'm going to put this on TikTok because.
Luan, I think TikTok is quite an interesting, channel that we've sort of looked at a couple of times throughout our conversation today. I come across often terms such as digital natives versus digital immigrants, and especially with regards to TikTok, because when it first started out, it was, a platform for children, really, or teenagers, I guess, when it was Musical.ly, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, when it comes to, as we said, sort of understanding what gratifications people are searching for on these different platforms, how important is such a simple demographic as age, when it comes to grouping the audience into sort of digital immigrants and digital natives? Can you tell me a little bit more about those different sort of terms and why they're important to consider?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because it actually is something that appeared in both versions of my book. And when I did the focus groups following the first version, I had some feedback going, it's not relevant now to still talk about digital natives and digital immigrants. And I did keep it in the second book because I kind of think it is important to make that distinction between people who have grown up with the internet and technologies, the digital natives, versus those of us, me included, who grew up without internet until, I was leaving university and social media once I was in the world of work. I think there is an important distinction, but we can't lump everyone into two groups because that would be far too simplistic. I think you have got that distinction, but you've also got attitudes around this as well. We know that, boomers some of them are very active on technologies, some aren't. There is a quote, I can't remember off the top of my head, around how social media, and this is all not just about the technology, it is about sociology and psychology as well. And one of the biggest things I encounter is a fear of technology, which I think is where the divide between natives and immigrants comes from. That can be overcome because the technology is teachable, is a fear. We can sit down and go through that. What we can't do is kind of guide people as to why we should be doing this or how useful the tool is and attitudes and behaviours.
But I noticed, for example, you didn't actually call the book a social media book. It's called Planning for Success. So presumably the principles that you're teaching could be applied to any new social media that come along, or even if we don't call it social media in 5-10 years time, it would still be applicable because it's marketing strategy that you're really teaching here.
I think you summarised it, Tom, but that's probably because you've read it and I talked about it a lot. It is not a how-to book, and it can't be a how-to book. You're right, because I would write it today and it would change tomorrow. It is about getting those fundamentals in place, like I said, understanding your personas and your market segments and your content pillars and things like that. But the first book I wrote in 2016 did date. Google Plus disappeared. TikTok wasn't around then. So I think there is a shelf life of the book, and I will keep it up to date because obviously, even from a buyer's perspective, if they saw a social media book that was dated 3 or 4 years ago, they're potentially not going to buy it because of the date of publication. I did try and write it in a way, as you said, this is almost, these principles can be applied no matter what happens. I did, again, ignoring some of the focus group feedback, include a bit of history of social media, because actually if you look at the history of social media, things go in patterns and in cycles. We see new platforms come in, we see features being copied and, new ones emerging. So there are patterns, and that's useful to understand. But I can also tell you, I can't tell you how many times I had to rewrite the section on what is Twitter, now X, what's happening. There will be changes, and there's already a few lines in there of at the time of writing. So keep up to date with webinars and weekly newsletters and things like that.
One of the most important messages I'd like to sort of send is that, those are social networking sites, right? They all got the same sort of idea of connecting people, and sharing information and being able to access a different pool of people. And, whether Twitter is X or not, whether it's going to become this massive mega app, whether Facebook's going to be around much longer, whether the audience might change or, algorithms might change what we see in our feed. I think a lot of the ideas surrounding it, they will, persist, and they will be the same in 20 years' time, whether, People Plus disappeared, but we've had different networks that do something similar. I don't see that as a big problem when it comes to trying to understand the ideas and the mechanisms behind it, and trying to understand people, whether there are differences, again, between genders or age or, attitude and beliefs, how we can impact them to a certain extent, because for me, those mechanisms work no matter where we look at online. And I think from a research point of view, and a lot of my book is, based on studies that are out there already, or, that I've collected the data myself. And a lot of the research now doesn't refer to a single social media site, but actually talks about social networking sites, because, it does remain current for longer. And because a lot of the ideas apply to different channels, So I do think, yes, it's very important to sort of look for the newest books, or, to stay on top of things, but also don't dismiss what has been written before, because those principles still apply. But definitely can just echo what Luan said in terms of, we all need to stay up to date. We need to see what's online. We need to look at blogs, at vlogs, at videos, at YouTube, webinars, to see sort of the newest updates.
What would be your recommendations for people that want to stay in?
I think it's finding me on social media. So I am on the main platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok as well. I do share updates. I think as self-employed, I have the opportunity to spend my time looking at updates. And I guess that's almost a service I provide to my clients and my peers and colleagues of I do this, so let me share the roundups with you, because it does take time.
And the book is called Planning for Success, a practical guide to setting and achieving your social media marketing goals.
Yeah, it's on Amazon in audio, Kindle and paperback versions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I would say that it's a good ending to our first podcast episode. So many thanks again.
Yes, thank you to Luan. And of course, thank you to all of you for listening. Hanne and I will speak to you again soon. If you do want to get in touch in the meantime, you'll find our contact details in the description. And of course, please give us a review and rate us whichever podcast platform you're listening to us on.
We speak to all of you soon.